It began on an ordinary evening when the sun was low enough to stretch shadows long across the street, turning familiar shapes into strangers. I was walking home from work, tired in the quiet way that settles into your bones rather than your muscles. The air smelled of dust and fading heat. Children were being called indoors, shop shutters rattled closed, and the world felt like it was holding its breath between day and night. That was when I noticed my shadow move before I did. I stopped walking, but my shadow took one more step, its outline sliding across the cracked pavement as if it hadn't received the message. For a moment, I laughed under my breath, blaming exhaustion. I shifted my weight, lifted my hands slowly. A heartbeat later, my shadow followed, a fraction of a second too late. Or too early. I stood there, pulse quickening, watching the dark shape stretch and sway. The streetlight flickered on, changing its angle, and the shadow snapped back into perfect alignment. I told myself it was nothing. Light plays tricks. Minds do too. But as I resumed walking, a strange awareness stayed with me, like being watched by something that knew me better than I knew myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I turned in bed, I imagined my shadow peeling itself off the wall, lingering behind when I moved. At some point near dawn, I finally drifted into a shallow sleep filled with half-dreams and uneasy thoughts. When I woke, the room was pale with morning light, and my shadow lay harmlessly beside me on the floor. Still, the memory of that moment on the street clung to me. Over the next few days, it happened again. Small things at first. I would reach for a cup, and my shadow's hand would rise just a breath before mine. I would turn my head, and the dark outline would already be looking in that direction. Each time, my heart jumped, and each time I forced myself to breathe through it. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? There are fears you can explain away, and then there are fears that sound ridiculous the moment they leave your mouth. Yet alongside the fear, there was something else. A quiet pull. A sense that my shadow wasn't threatening me, but trying to show me something. I began to notice changes in my life that had nothing to do with light or darkness. On my daily commute, I started seeing the people I usually ignored. The old man who sat on the same bench every morning, feeding pigeons with hands that shook slightly. The woman outside the grocery store who never met anyone's eyes, her cardboard sign more apology than request. The boy in my building who always walked a step behind his mother, shoulders hunched, as if trying to take up less space in the world. Before, they had been part of the background. Now they stood out, sharp and undeniable, like shadows against a bright wall. One afternoon, as I passed the bench with the old man, my shadow stretched toward him, its arm long and thin. I slowed, confused, then stopped. The man looked up, surprised, and smiled with a gentleness that made my chest ache. We talked for a few minutes about the weather, about how the pigeons seemed bolder every year. When I left, he waved, and I felt lighter, as if I'd set something down without realizing I'd been carrying it. That night, my shadow behaved itself, moving exactly when I did. The pattern continued. Whenever I felt that odd dissonance, that sense of my shadow leading instead of following, it happened near someone who seemed unseen. Once, outside the grocery store, my shadow leaned toward the woman with the cardboard sign. I hesitated, then dug into my pocket and offered her what little cash I had. She looked up, startled, then smiled so brightly it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. We spoke briefly. Her name was Layla. She thanked me not just for the money, but for stopping. For stopping. The words echoed in my mind long after I walked away. I started to understand that my shadow wasn't acting on its own. It was responding to something in me, something I'd ignored for a long time. I had been moving through life efficiently, carefully, doing what was required and nothing more. I told myself I was kind, that I cared, but caring from a distance is easy. It asks nothing of you. The shadow asked for action. Still, there were moments when fear returned. Late one evening, I caught my reflection in a darkened window and saw my shadow standing slightly apart from me, its head tilted as if studying my face. The street was empty, the silence thick. For a terrible second, I wondered what would happen if it decided not to follow me at all. "Don't," I whispered, feeling foolish and desperate at the same time. The shadow slid back into place. I realized then that this wasn't about control. It was about attention. The shadow moved first when I hesitated, when I looked away from what mattered. It was a reminder, not a threat. As weeks passed, my world changed in subtle but profound ways. I began volunteering at a small community kitchen on Saturdays. The first day I went, nervous and unsure, my shadow walked confidently ahead of me through the doorway. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of spices and bread. People laughed, argued gently over recipes, moved with purpose. I found myself chopping vegetables next to a woman who told me about her grandchildren, her hands quick and sure. By the end of the day, my feet ached, but my heart felt full in a way I hadn't known it could. At the kitchen, no one cared about shadows. They cared about showing up. One evening, as I was leaving, I noticed a familiar small figure by the door. It was the boy from my building, the one who always walked behind his mother. He was holding a tray of bread, his eyes wide. When he saw me, he froze, then smiled shyly. I smiled back, and for the first time, he didn't look away. On the walk home, my shadow matched me step for step. The biggest test came months later, on a night when the city was wrapped in heavy rain. The streets shone with reflections, doubling every light, every movement. I was hurrying, head down, when I felt it again. That unmistakable sensation of my shadow pulling ahead. I looked up and saw a woman standing under the awning of a closed shop, soaked and shivering. She held a phone in one hand, frustration etched into her face. Cars rushed past, spraying water. For a moment, I hesitated. I was tired. I was wet. I didn't want to get involved. My shadow took a step toward her. I followed. It turned out her car had broken down a few blocks away. She'd been trying to get a ride or call for help, but the rain made everything harder. We walked together to a cafe that was still open, found warmth and a working phone. She thanked me over and over, her voice trembling more from relief than cold. As I watched her finally get into a taxi, safe and dry, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet certainty. This was who I was meant to be, not perfect or heroic, just present. When I turned to leave, I glanced down. My shadow was exactly where it should be, dark and steady at my side. Years have passed since that first strange evening. My shadow has never frightened me again. Sometimes, in certain lights, it still seems eager, leaning forward as if ready to move. But now I understand it isn't trying to lead me somewhere unknown. It's reminding me of a simple truth. We are all shadows to one another at times, passing unnoticed, our outlines blending into the background. Kindness is what brings us into the light. It's what gives shape to our presence, what makes us real to each other. I still walk the same streets. I still get tired. I still have days when I'd rather look away. On those days, I pay attention to the ground beneath my feet, to the dark shape that mirrors me. If it ever moves first, I know it's time to stop, to look up, to see who needs me. And every time I do, the world feels a little less dark, as if countless shadows, finally seen, are learning to move together.